The stars over Terra were ancient and silent, their light filtered through a night sky unbroken by the noise of technology. Humanity lived fractured, clinging to survival in scattered tribes, knowing nothing of the galaxy's vastness beyond their skies. Yet that silence was destined to end. Without warning, the heavens split apart in a wound of impossible color, a tear in the very fabric of creation. The air shimmered as if reality itself were unraveling. The people of Terra, scattered across their primitive lands, fell to their knees, terrified at the sight of a storm that was not of wind or rain, but of stars bleeding through the sky. From that rift came something colossal, a figure wreathed in light and fire, vast in size yet shaped with a familiar symmetry, descended from the burning heavens. His frame was metal, yet alive, movements fluid like flesh. Each step shook the earth, each sound of his joints resonating like thunder rolling through mountains. Tribesmen and warriors dropped their weapons, overwhelmed not only by fear but by awe at the scale of what they beheld. Some whispered of gods, others screamed of demons. Optimus Prime stood upon Terra, his form gleaming in the glow of the rift that birthed him. His optics burned blue, not with cold cruelty but with an almost impossible compassion. His arrival was no mere chance of fate, it was a cosmic collision. The all-spark, still tied to his being, had brushed against the swirling tides of the immaterium. Chaos had noticed, twisting reality, tearing open a path that delivered him here. In the shadows of the warp, the Chaos gods stirred with sudden interest. Khorne hungered at the thought of such a warrior's blood. Tzeentch whispered schemes of how to bend this anomaly to his labyrinth of futures. Nurgle chuckled at the idea of rust upon such pristine metal, while Slaanesh admired the perfection of his symmetry. None understood why this being had come, but all recognized the disruption. On Terra, Optimus' first instinct was not conquest but calm. He raised his hands slowly, his massive fingers spreading in a gesture of peace. His voice, deep and resonant, echoed like thunder rolling through valleys, yet carried no threat. "I am not here to harm you," he said, his words translated through ancient tongues as if the universe itself bent to ensure understanding. "I am here to protect." The flames of his arrival died down, leaving smoke and glowing earth beneath his towering frame. People dared to lift their eyes again, seeing not just a giant of steel but something gentler, something foreign to their war-torn world. His gaze did not command obedience, nor did it demand worship. It was reassuring. For the first time in generations, humans saw a figure of immense power who did not rule through fear. That alone made him terrifying in its unfamiliarity. Yet even as hope flickered, fear remained. Leaders of tribes argued in hushed tones. Was this the end of mankind, heralded by a god of machines, or the dawn of salvation? Optimus felt the weight of their stares, understood their confusion, but did not move to dominate them. He merely stood, letting them see he was no phantom, no illusion, but a real guardian who had stepped from the stars. Above, the rift closed with a shudder, leaving the sky scarred. Optimus tilted his head slightly, aware that this was no simple accident of fate. Something greater had intervened. He looked out across the frightened humans before him and saw more than fear, he saw need. The galaxy he had known was gone, replaced by this brutal new realm. Yet one truth remained unshaken in him. Freedom and compassion must endure. And so the legend began. The Moshin god had stepped onto Terra, not with a sword raised high, but with a hand outstretched. The Chaos gods watched, amused, but wary. For in that moment, humanity had found a new figure to rally behind, one unlike any they had ever known. The tribe gathered in silence, their firelight flickering against the massive silhouette that towered above them. At first, no one dared to breathe. Spears and crude blades trembled in human hands, their points useless against a being who looked as if he had been carved from the bones of the stars themselves. Children clung to their mothers, elders muttered prayers, and warriors braced for the inevitable strike. Yet the strike never came. Instead, the giant knelt. The ground quaked under the weight of his gesture, but the motion was slow, deliberate, and strangely gentle. Metal knees bent with care, hydraulic sighing as his vast frame lowered until his burning optics were level with the humans below. For the first time, they could see not just power, but intent in his gaze. It was not the cold, predatory stare of a conqueror. It was the steady, reassuring look of someone who wished to understand. "I am Optimus Prime," the voice boomed. carrying across the camp like thunder softened by distance. Its tone was deep, resonant, and filled with authority, yet it lacked the cruelty they had come to expect from warlords. Instead, it carried warmth. The humans flinched at the sound, but slowly, cautiously, they lifted their eyes. The leader of the tribe, a man scarred from years of brutal survival, stepped forward. He carried no crown, no armor of grandeur, only a bone-etched spear that had seen countless battles. His body trembled as he stood beneath the shadow of the machine. "What are you?" His voice cracked, half defiance, half fear. Optimus did not bristle at the challenge. He did not raise a weapon or demand submission. Instead, he leaned closer, lowering his massive head until his glowing optics reflected in the man's wide eyes. "I am not your enemy," Optimus said. "I have seen what division brings. I have watched my world destroy itself because brother turned against brother. I will not see yours suffer the same fate." Murmurs rippled through the gathered people. Some whispered that he was a god, descended from the heavens to bring salvation. Others hissed that no man of flesh could trust a creature of steel. The air was heavy with uncertainty, but curiosity burned brighter than fear. Optimus extended his hand, palm open, vast enough to hold half their camp. It could have been a gesture of dominance, yet the intent was unmistakable. He was offering trust. For long, tense moments, no one moved. Then a child broke free from his mother's grasp. Small, barefoot, and trembling, the child stepped into the shadow of that hand. Gasps echoed through the camp. The child reached out, touching the cool metal of Optimus' finger. No harm came. No strike followed. Instead, Optimus' optics softened, his voice dropping into a rumble that was as close to gentle as something so massive could manage. "Do not fear me. I am here to protect you." That single act broke the dam of terror. Slowly, others approached. Warriors lowered their spears. The tribe's leader, still cautious, placed his hand upon the same metal finger. His voice shook as he said, "If you speak truth, then teach us. Show us how to end the bloodshed." Optimus nodded once, a gesture both regal and humble. He began to speak, his words not of conquest but of history. He told them of Cybertron, a world once radiant, consumed by civil war when greed and ambition tore its people apart. He spoke of Megatron, of brotherhood betrayed, and of how war left nothing but ruins. His voice carried sorrow, but also hope. "Do not repeat our mistakes," he urged. "Unity does not mean the end of freedom. It means strength enough to endure." The humans listened, captivated, though confusion lingered. In a world where mercy was rare and cruelty the norm, Optimus' compassion seemed alien. Some believed he was a god of light. Others muttered of a demon in disguise. Yet none could deny the feeling that, for the first time in memory, they stood before something greater than war. As night deepened, whispers spread across the campfires. Some spoke of building under his guidance. Others feared they would become slaves to his will. Optimus listened to every voice, never silencing dissent, only answering with patience. Yet he knew their trust would not be easily won. In this age, kindness was often mistaken for weakness, and weakness invited betrayal. Still, Optimus did not waver. He had walked battlefields soaked in despair, and had seen the cost of letting hope die. He would not abandon these fragile sparks of humanity. Whatever trials awaited, he would meet them as he always had, not with tyranny, but with an unyielding belief that freedom, even here in the darkest of futures, was worth defending. And so the first bond was formed, not of chains or fear, but of trust, fragile as it was. Above, unseen in the shadows of the warp, the gods of chaos laughed and whispered. They saw not a tyrant forged by destiny, but a protector bound by ideals. To them, he was prey waiting to be broken. To the humans gathered in that camp, however, Optimus Prime was the beginning of a legend. The tale of the metal giant spread faster than fire racing across dry grass. What had begun as frightened whispers in a single camp soon echoed through the valleys and mountains of terror. Traders carried the stories on their journeys. Wandering poets and shamans retold them with voices trembling between fear and reverence. In every retelling, the figure grew larger, brighter, more godlike. To some, he was the Lightbringer, the one who descended from the heavens to banish endless darkness. To others, he was the Machengard, forged of stars and steel, whose heart beat not with blood but with purest light. Yet legends are rarely born of words alone. Optimus did not simply allow stories to inflate his stature. He gave them fuel through his actions. Where once tribes warred endlessly, he strode between them, placing his massive frame between clashing armies. Arrows and spears shattered harmlessly against his armored chest as his voice thundered, commanding peace without violence. To villages plagued by raiders, he became a shield and sword, driving away attackers but refusing to slaughter those who surrendered. He lifted fallen beams from crumbling huts, dug through debris to free children, and carried the wounded with hands that could have crushed stone. Humanity had seen kings, conquerors, and monsters. Never before had they seen power married with mercy. In every act, Optimus deepened the divide between himself and the path once taken by the Emperor of mankind. The Emperor demanded obedience, cloaked in inevitability, and ruled through the promise of power. Optimus asked for none of these things. He sought respect, not fear, and earned it through compassion and sacrifice. This difference did not go unnoticed, either by mortals or by the entities lurking beyond the veil of reality. In the warp, ripples of his presence disturbed the eternal game. Tzianch, ever scheming, saw the possibilities unfolding like endless strands of thread. Here was a figure whose very existence shifted fate away from the Emperor's harsh dominion. Was he a weak incarnate, a softer leader who could be twisted and undone? Or was he a threat greater than the Emperor, because he inspired true loyalty instead of forced servitude? Across the endless labyrinth of futures, Tzianch whispered to himself, plotting 1,000 ways to turn the machine god's compassion into humanity's downfall. Khorne, meanwhile, sneered with crimson delight. He cared nothing for compassion, only for the blood that would surely follow when such ideals clashed with reality. Let him preach unity, Khorne rumbled, his laughter echoing through the warp. When the killing begins, his followers will drown the stars in blood, and their faith in him will become a feast for me. The other gods stirred with curiosity, each recognizing that this being of steel and light was no accident. Something had been torn from the order of destiny, and it threatened to unravel the game they had played since time immemorial. Back on Terra, Optimus was unaware of these cosmic debates. He saw only the fragile sparks of hope kindling among the tribes. They began to gather beneath his banner, not out of fear but from choice. Warriors swore loyalty to the machine guard who defended the weak. Mothers brought their children to look upon him, believing they gazed into the eyes of a savior. And though some leaders remained skeptical, even suspicious, they could not deny that the tribes were changing. Wars slowed, rivalries dulled, and for the first time in millennia, unity seemed possible. But hope is never without shadow. Whispers turned into arguments. Some claimed the machine god was truly divine, the herald of a new age. Others muttered that no man of flesh should bow to a being of steel. Rumors of corruption spread, accusing Optimus of hiding darker intentions, of luring humanity into a gilded cage. Though his actions proved otherwise, suspicion lingered. In a brutal world, kindness was an enigma too alien to fully trust. Optimus remained steadfast. He stood before gathered tribes and spoke words that would be etched into memory. Freedom is the right of all sentient beings. His declaration echoed across valleys, repeated by poets and etched into stone. It was a promise, a warning, and a creed. The people listened, uncertain but captivated, knowing they were witnessing the birth of something greater than mere myth. And so Chapter 1 closed, not with triumph, but with tension. Humanity began to rally, legends blossomed, and the machine god's name spread like wildfire. But in the unseen void of the warp, dark eyes watched, schemes twisted, and whispers promised ruin. For in the grim darkness of the far future, hope itself was the most dangerous spark of all. The first step toward unity was not conquest, but conversation. Optimus refused the mantle of tyrant, even when humans begged him to claim it. Instead, he called for the leaders of tribes to gather, not as subjects but as equals, beneath the shadow of his towering frame. They formed a circle around a great stone platform, and there, for the first time in Terra's memory, a council was born. Some came armed, ready to resist. Others came curious, suspicious of the giant who bent down to listen rather than command. Optimus opened not with orders but with stories, reminding them that division had nearly destroyed his own world. If you cannot sit together in peace, he said, his voice resonant, you will never stand against the storms that come from the stars. Slowly, grudgingly, the tribes accepted. A council of humanity was established, a fragile body of voices meant to represent every clan, every region, every lineage. Decisions were debated instead of imposed. Where war once settled disputes, words began to take root. Optimus guided them patiently, reminding them that freedom required responsibility. His presence loomed like a mountain, yet he acted as mediator rather than master, ensuring each tribe was heard. With unity came progress. Under Optimus' guidance, humans learned to shape their world in ways that once seemed impossible. From fragments of Cybertronian technology, he taught them how to draw clean energy from the Earth and stars, replacing fire pits with radiant lamps that lit villages through the night. He introduced medicine beyond their imagination, simple salves and machines that healed wounds which once claimed countless lives. Children who would have perished from fevers now survived. Crops grew stronger, harvests richer, as new tools replaced crude hands and wooden plows. For the first time in centuries, famine loosened its grip. Architecture itself transformed. With Optimus' instruction, humans built cities unlike anything their ancestors had dreamed of. Massive walls of steel and stone rose, forged in hybrid styles that echoed Cybertron's sleek geometry but retained the warmth of human craft. Towers stood as symbols of collaboration, not domination. Where once only tribal villages stood scattered, shining settlements emerged, linked by roads and defended not only by warriors but by hope. Yet even in this golden dawn, shadows lingered. Some leaders whispered uneasily that Optimus' gifts came at a price yet unpaid. They distrusted the machines, fearing the alien knowledge would enslave humanity rather than liberate it. Warlords who once thrived on division bristled at the Council's authority, whispering in dark corners that a throne was waiting for any strong enough to seize it. And while Optimus sought to disperse power, his refusal to claim it outright left dangerous cracks. The seeds of ambition grew in silence, waiting for the right storm to betrayal. Optimus knew these doubts well. He saw the sidelong glances, heard the hushed voices questioning whether he was savior or deceiver, but he did not flinch. His creed had been forged in battlefields long gone, and he would not abandon it now. "I will not rule you," he declared before the council. "I will guide you. I will fight for you. But the future of humanity must belong to humanity itself." His words carried weight, yet he knew they could not silence ambition forever. The council's chambers echoed with the first fragile agreements of peace. Cities rose from ash, torches gave way to radiant light, and children played beneath structures built by hands once used only for war. For the first time, humanity began to imagine a future not defined by endless bloodshed. But for every new hope, Optimus felt the strain of responsibility tighten around him. His empire was not a fortress of iron and obedience, it was a delicate tapestry of trust. And trust, he knew, was the most fragile foundation of all. The Machine God had laid the first stones of an imperium built not on fear but on faith. Yet in the shadows of the warp, chaos stirred restlessly. To them, every new city was a challenge, every council meeting a spark to be twisted into flame. Optimus pressed forward, determined. He had built a foundation. Now he would need protectors to uphold it. The time had come to forge the Autobot legions. From the ashes of endless tribal wars, Optimus knew that peace alone would not endure. The cities he had helped humanity build gleamed with new hope, but hope without defenders was a candle in a storm. The Chaos Gods, distant yet watchful, would never allow such light to stand unchallenged. And so, Optimus made a choice that would shape humanity's destiny for millennia. He would forge warriors, not to rule as tyrants, but to guard as protectors. The call went out across Terra. From every tribe and settlement, men and women were invited to stand before the Machine God. They were not chosen for bloodline, wealth, or conquest, but for spirit. Those who carried courage in their hearts, who placed the lives of others above their own, were summoned to the great forges and training grounds that Optimus built upon the ruins of old battlegrounds. It began with stories. Optimus spoke not of power, but of responsibility. He told them of the Autobots of Cybertron, warriors who fought not for domination, but for freedom, who stood even when the cost was unbearable. He spoke of sacrifice, of standing between the weak and the storm. The recruits listened, wide-eyed, not just to a commander, but to a guardian who asked for loyalty born of choice, not chains. Then came transformation. Using fragments of Cybertronian science adapted to human biology, Optimus and his most trusted engineers created a process that enhanced strength, speed, and resilience. Muscles grew denser, reflexes sharpened, and endurance surpassed normal human limits. Unlike the Emperor's Space Marines, who were remade through indoctrination and stripped of individuality, these new warriors retained their humanity. Each bore scars of their past, each carried names, memories, and choices. Optimus demanded it, for to lose individuality was to betray the very freedom they were sworn to defend. The training grounds rang with the clash of steel, the hum of new weapons, and the rhythm of voices chanting oaths of loyalty. Camaraderie grew quickly. Where once tribes distrusted one another, warriors now fought side by side, learning not to conquer rivals but to protect strangers. They trained in squads, slept in shared barracks, and ate at the same tables, their divisions eroded by shared purpose. Bonds formed that transcended tribe or blood, uniting them as brothers and sisters in arms. Optimus himself walked among them, a towering figure of inspiration. He sparred with recruits, teaching restraint as much as aggression. His words echoed through the halls. Strength without honor is destruction. Power without compassion is tyranny. You will not be destroyers, you will be defenders. Each lesson carved deep into their hearts, turning raw recruits into something greater than warriors, symbols of a new humanity. And soon, they took a name. Around the fires of their camps, the recruits began calling themselves the Autobot Legions. The name spread, catching flame in every city and village. Parents told their children tales of the Legions, heroes who embodied freedom and courage. Where once humans fought to survive, now they trained to protect something larger, an imperium built on ideals. But shadows crept alongside the light. Rumors spread from bitter warlords who had lost their power under the council. They whispered that Optimus was creating slaves, binding humanity in steel and machine to serve his will. Others feared that in giving ordinary humans power beyond imagination, he had built the seeds of rebellion that could one day topple the very ideals he cherished. The whispers grew into murmurs, and the murmurs into questions that echoed across the council's chambers. Optimus did not silence the doubts. He answered them with patience, reminding all that freedom meant choice, even the choice to question. Yet the unease remained. In a galaxy designed for cruelty, could warriors of compassion survive? Could honor endure when the warp whispered promises of endless power? For now, however, the Autobot Legions stood ready. Clad in armor that gleamed with both human craft and Cybertronian design, carrying weapons built not for terror but for defense, they became the living embodiment of Optimus' creed. They were humanity's shield, its sword, and its hope. Their birth was celebrated in song and story, their presence a beacon to frightened colonies. The Imperium of the Meshing God had found its defenders, but in the warp, chaos stirred with laughter. For every oath sworn, every sword lifted in the name of honor, the dark god saw opportunity. And soon, the legions would face their first trial by fire. The first true test of Optimus' Imperium came not from within the council halls, but from the stars. Far beyond the shining walls of the new cities, whispers of chaos had found a vessel, a warlord twisted by the warp until his very flesh and armor were indistinguishable. Once a human conqueror, now a demon's puppet, he marched with legions of corrupted warriors, their weapons dripping with warp-touched fire. The city of Erythra, jewel of the fledgling Imperium, became their target. Its towers gleamed in the light of new technology. Its people sang songs of hope. To chaos, such light was nothing but an insult. The assault came with no warning. The sky tore open with shrieking storms as corrupted engines descended. War machines, twisted parodies of Optimus gifts, lumbered across the plains, spewing fire and shadow. The ground trembled under their advance, and the people of Erythra screamed as their walls buckled against the assault. The Autobot legions rushed to the defense, their gleaming armor shining like beacons against the tide of corruption. They fought with courage, blades flashing, rifles burning, their voices crying out the oaths Optimus had taught them. But chaos was relentless. For every enemy cut down, two more rose from the shadows. The corrupted warlord himself appeared, towering above mortals, his body fused with demonic steel. His laughter echoed across the battlefield, promising annihilation. "Your machine roared," voice dripping with warp venom. "You are nothing but fuel for the fire." Then, through the smoke and flame, Optimus Prime entered the fray. His massive frame strode into the chaos, eyes blazing with azure light. The battlefield fell silent for a heartbeat, as if reality itself paused to witness his arrival. He raised his sword, forged from Cybertronian steel, reforged upon Terra's anvil, and his voice carried above the din. "Stand fast. For every life you save, you defy the darkness." The battle exploded anew. Optimus clashed with the Chaos war machines, his blade carving through corrupted steel as sparks and IKR rained around him. He fought not from a throne, but from the front, shoulder to shoulder with his legions. Every strike he made was measured, not to slaughter indiscriminately, but to shield the innocent. Time and again he turned from killing blows to protecting fleeing civilians, lifting debris, and shielding children with his own body. His commanders begged him to unleash total annihilation, to sacrifice lives in order to ensure victory. Yet Optimus refused. "If we abandon mercy, we abandon ourselves," he declared, even as the cost of his choice mounted. The Autobot legions mirrored his resolve, forming shields around the vulnerable, dragging the wounded from the jaws of demons, fighting with valor that defied despair. But the price was staggering. Streets ran with blood, and towers once built in hope fell into ruin. Victory demanded more than courage, it demanded sacrifice. At the battle's height, Optimus faced the Chaos Warlord in single combat. The demon's blade, forged in the warp, clashed against the Prime's steel, shaking the very earth with every strike. Sparks and shadows danced in the air as the two titans fought, ideals crashing as fiercely as their weapons. "You will break," the warlord snarled. "Hope is weakness. Mercy is a lie." Optimus' reply came as his blade drove through the corrupted heart of the creature. Hope is what endures when all else falls. With one final blow, the warlord collapsed in a shriek of rage, his body torn apart in a blaze of blue fire. The battlefield went still. Chaos was broken for now. The survivors gathered in the ruins of Erythra, faces streaked with ash and tears. Their city lay scarred, their families shattered, yet Optimus stood among them, battered but unbroken. He raised his voice once more, speaking not as a god but as a leader who shared in their loss. "We have faced the darkness and paid dearly, but we endure, not because we are strong alone, but because we stand together. Unity is our shield. Hope is our weapon. And as long as even one spark remains, humanity will not fall." The people wept and cheered in equal measure, clinging to his words as a lifeline. The Autobot legions saluted their prime, their voices ringing in unison. For a moment, the galaxy seemed brighter. But in the warp, laughter echoed. Tezianche whispered of futures already twisting. Khorne grinned at the rivers of blood spilled in the name of mercy. And so the game began. The dream of the heavens had always lingered in humanity's myths. Tribes had once pointed to the stars and named them gods, believing them unreachable, eternal. Now, under the guidance of Optimus Prime, those distant lights became destinations. It began with a revelation. Vast structures rising in the heart of Terra's new cities, vessels unlike anything humanity had imagined. Crafted with a blend of human ingenuity and fragments of Cybertronian design, these starships gleamed like silver blades against the sky. Where once smoke from campfires stained the horizon, now towers crowned with launch platforms pierced the clouds. The first launch was a moment of legend. Entire populations gathered to watch as the vessel roared into the void. Its engines, a harmony of Cybertronian cores and human craftsmanship, split the heavens with a brilliance unseen in millennia. People knelt in reverence, some weeping, some shouting songs of praise to the machine god who had given them this gift. For a moment, Terra itself felt too small to contain their awe. Colonization followed swiftly. Within decades, humanity reached the stars, spreading across nearby systems that had once been silent, unreachable specks in the night sky. Planets that had known only silence for eons now rang with human voices, laughter, and labor. Settlements grew on alien soil, their banners bearing the sigil of the Autobot. Children were born beneath alien suns, their first sight of the world shaped by hope rather than ruin. Optimus' promise seemed fulfilled. Mankind was no longer chained to a single, fragile world. Yet even in triumph, Optimus counseled caution. Standing before vast crowds, his voice carried a somber weight. "Do not forget," he warned, "that my people, too, reached the stars. And in reaching, they fell. Division destroyed us. Pride consumed us. What you build among these stars must be bound not by conquest, but by unity. To repeat Cybertron's mistakes is to condemn yourselves." His words were heeded by many, yet others heard only the call of opportunity. Freedom was Optimus' creed, and he allowed colonies to flourish in their own ways. He did not impose rigid laws or demand uniformity. Worlds developed unique cultures, economies, and traditions. their differences celebrated rather than silenced. Some colonies embraced science, turning barren planets into thriving gardens. Others built fortresses of stone and steel, preparing for the inevitable wars they believed would come. The variety of humanity spread across the stars became both a strength and a seed of discord. For while many hailed Optimus as the Lightbringer, others began to question his restraint. Why should the colonies not rule themselves entirely, free of Terra's guidance? Why should his legions decide when peace must be enforced? The whispers were faint, hidden beneath the joy of exploration, but they existed. Ambition had not died, it had only been delayed. In these early days, however, hope shone brighter than doubt. Colonists looked to the stars with pride, believing they were chosen by the Machengard to inherit the galaxy. Songs of the new dawn spread from world to world, praising Optimus not as a conqueror, but as a guardian who had opened the heavens. Families spoke with reverence of children who might one day call alien worlds their homes. For the first time in history, humanity felt infinite. And yet, in the warp, the gods laughed. To them, each new world was not a beacon but an opportunity. Tezinti, the changer of ways, whispered of subtle fractures already forming. Khorne salivated at the wars that freedom would inevitably spark. Nurgle muttered promises of decay to come. Only Optimus, standing among his people, carried the burden of foresight. He knew that while humanity's rise was glorious, its fragility was absolute. The gift of the stars had been given. Now the question remained: could freedom survive the void? At first, the colonies thrived. Worlds once silent and empty now echoed with human voices, their cities rising under twin suns or carved into mountain ranges beneath alien skies. Farmers tilled fertile plains with tools far beyond their ancestors' crude designs, while scientists uncovered minerals and energy sources undreamed of on Terra. For a brief moment, the galaxy seemed infinite, and humanity carried the torch of hope into every corner of the void. But hope, Optimus knew, was fragile. Where freedom bloomed, so too did dissent. Not every colony saw Terra as its guiding light. Some grew arrogant, claiming their newfound strength entitled them to independence. Leaders of these worlds sent word to the Council, declaring that while they honored Optimus' guidance, they no longer wished to bow to distant voices. Others went further, spurning his ideals entirely, branding his compassion as weakness unfit for survival among the stars. The debates in the Council grew heated. Representatives of loyal worlds argued for unity, pointing to the dangers that lurked in the void. Without a single banner, they warned, we will be torn apart by powers greater than ourselves. But dissenters countered, claiming the galaxy was too vast for Terra to command. We are free, one governor declared, and freedom is not obedience to a god of steel. Optimus himself did not silence these voices. He listened, his optics burning with patience even as anger stirred among his followers. Unity must be chosen, not forced, he told the council. Yet his words, though noble, only deepened the divide. To some, they proved his greatness, to others. They revealed his naivety. The emperor of mankind would have crushed rebellion with fire. Optimus offered dialogue, and dialogue gave chaos time to whisper. In hidden corners of the colonies, those whispers grew. Tezinche promised governors the power to rule unchallenged, whispering secret knowledge and forbidden sorcery. Khorne stoked the pride of warriors, urging them to cast aside restraint and claim glory in endless conquest. Chaos cults emerged in the shadows, twisting the machine god's name into mockery. They promised strength without compassion, power without chains, destiny without restraint. On some worlds, entire populations turned, seeing in chaos the freedom Optimus could never deliver. The Autobot legions were dispatched as mediators. They traveled from world to world, not with the iron fist of conquerors, but with the steady hands of protectors. They settled disputes, shielded innocents, and reminded colonists of the ideals Optimus had given them. Yet even they faced suspicion. You claim to defend freedom, rebels jeered, but you march in the name of a foreign god. For every colony the legions saved, another drifted further away. Optimus felt the weight of every fracture. In private, he admitted his doubts. Could an empire survive without iron law? Could compassion bind a species that had spent millennia killing itself? He thought of Cybertron's fall, of how Megatron had once preached freedom only to twist it into tyranny. He feared humanity might walk the same path, their ideals collapsing under ambition and greed. Still, he refused to abandon his creed. If freedom dies by my hand, he said quietly to his closest commanders, then I was no guardian at all. But even as he clung to hope, the shadows lengthened. Reports arrived of colonies vanishing into silence, their cities empty, their people gone. Others erupted in rebellion, their leaders raising banners of independence. The council teetered on the edge of collapse, unable to reconcile loyalty with liberty. And across the warp, the gods watched with delight, for every fracture was a victory, every argument another step toward corruption. Optimus stood at a crossroads. His empire spanned the stars, but unity slipped through his hands like sand. He gazed upon the star maps of humanity's expansion, seeing light and shadow scattered across the void. For every world that embraced his ideals, another turned away. The imperium he had built was vast, but fragile, held together not by chains but by choice. And choice, he knew, could just as easily undo everything he had built. The warp is never silent. It churns with endless schemes, each god weaving threads of fate through the galaxy. And as humanity spread under Optimus' light, the Chaos Gods leaned closer, like predators circling a fire. To Tzinche, every council dispute was a thread to twist into rebellion. To Khorne, every battle between loyalists and dissenters was a hymn of blood. Nurgle whispered promises of endurance to desperate colonies, while Slaanesh seduced leaders with visions of glory. What should have been a golden dawn for humanity became a banquet for the warp. It began with whispers. In colonies struggling with famine or division, mysterious prophets appeared. They wore robes stitched with metallic thread, their voices eerily familiar, echoing phrases Optimus himself had spoken. They preached of the true Machine God, a being not of compassion but of domination, promising that only through submission could humanity endure the stars. At first, few listened. But as hunger gnawed and fear deepened, their words spread like a contagion. Soon, entire cults emerged. They twisted Optimus' creed, replacing his promise of freedom with chains disguised as salvation. Their symbol was a broken Autobot sigil, cracked down the middle, painted in ash and blood. To them, Optimus was not a savior but a deceiver who held humanity back from its true destiny. They declared he was too weak to rule, too merciful to survive, and that a new machine god awaited in the shadows to lead them. Optimus learned of these cults and felt sorrow instead of anger. He addressed the council, his optics glowing with quiet pain. "They do not understand," he said. "They see kindness as weakness, restraint as failure. But if I silence them with fear, I become the tyrant I swore never to be." His commanders pressed for harsher measures, but Optimus refused. Freedom, he believed, meant the freedom to choose even if some chose darkness. Yet in giving space for choice, he allowed corruption to root deeper. The first uprising came on a frontier colony called Lethes. Once a thriving settlement, it fell into chaos when the cult of the false machine god declared open rebellion. They seized factories, enslaved civilians, and summoned horrors from the warp to solidify their power. When reports reached Terra, Optimus immediately set out with the Autobot legions, his heart heavy but his resolve unbroken. By the time he arrived, Lethes burned. Cities lay in ruin, their streets filled with corpses. Chaos war machines, grotesque parodies of Optimus' gifts, stalked the shattered roads. Survivors huddled in the shadows, their eyes hollow with terror. The cultists had not merely rebelled, they had turned the colony into a shrine of horror. Optimus descended in wrath, his blade blazing with blue fire. He tore through corrupted engines, his strikes shaking the ground. The Autobot legions fought with unyielding courage, cutting through demonic hordes to free survivors. Yet every victory was bittersweet, for they could not undo the slaughter already wrought. Families were gone, generations erased in days. Optimus fought like a god of vengeance, but in his spark burned sorrow rather than rage. At the rebellion's heart, he faced the cult's high priest, a man whose flesh had fused with machine parts, his voice a twisted echo of Optimus' own. "You are false," the priest hissed, his body writhing with warp corruption. "Mercy is weakness. Only the true machine god can deliver humanity." Optimus struck him down with one final blow, his optics dim with grief as the priest collapsed, hissing laughter even in death. The battle ended, but the cost was unbearable. Lethes lay silent, its people broken. The colonists who survived looked at Optimus with gratitude, but also fear. Could even he protect them when shadows spread so easily? Standing among the ruins, Optimus addressed his weary legions. His voice, usually thunderous, was quiet, almost sorrowful. "We cannot save all. We cannot shield every spark. Freedom's price is vigilance, endless, unyielding vigilance. And still, some will fall. His words were not a proclamation of victory, but an acknowledgement of reality. The legions bowed their heads, understanding the weight of his burden. Above, in the warp, the gods laughed. The rebellion had been crushed, but Optimus' ideals were bleeding. For every colony he saved, another slipped further from his reach. And as he gazed into the starry void, Optimus knew this was only the beginning. Magnaris had once been the pride of the Autobot legions, born of Terra's harshest tribes, hardened in battle against Chaos warlords, and tempered in Optimus' vision of honor. He rose swiftly through the ranks. Soldiers admired him for his courage and brilliance. His strategies saved countless colonies from ruin, and his victories were sung in the halls of the council. When Magnaris spoke, warriors listened. He carried himself with the fire of a leader, and many whispered that if Optimus was the Imperium's soul, Magnaris was its unbreakable blade. But admiration turned to unease as his words grew sharper. In council meetings and training grounds, he began to voice frustrations with Optimus' mercy. "We bleed because we hesitate," he told his soldiers. "We lose cities because our prime values compassion over conquest. Mercy cannot shield us from chaos. Only obedience, absolute and unyielding, will preserve mankind." The word struck a chord with many who had lost brothers and sisters in battles where Optimus had chosen restraint. To them, Magnaris offered a vision of survival without compromise. Optimus noticed. He saw the pride in Magnaris's eyes, the dangerous certainty of his tone. Yet he did not silence him. To silence a voice, Optimus believed, was to betray freedom. "You are free to question," he told Magnaris, "but never forget what makes us different from the darkness we fight. If we rule by fear, we are no better than the tyrants we oppose." The words were spoken with calm authority, but in Magnaris's heart they only hardened his conviction. To him, Optimus' ideals were noble lies, beautiful but unsustainable in a galaxy drenched in blood. The divide between them grew quietly at first. In the mess halls, soldiers debated which vision they believed in. Some clung to Optimus' hope, refusing to abandon mercy even in the face of constant loss. Others began to murmur that perhaps Magnaris was right, that strength demanded control, that loyalty demanded chains. Camps of thought split within the legions, invisible cracks running beneath the unity Optimus had fought so hard to build. And in the shadows, the warp stirred. "Seizin!" Ever the manipulator whispered into Magnaris's dreams. He saw visions of a future where humanity survived not through compassion, but through absolute dominion. In these dreams, he was not a commander beneath another's shadow, but a ruler, humanity's true savior, unflinching and unyielding. The whispers fed his pride, convincing him that Optimus' path would doom them all. Unaware of the depth of corruption, Optimus remained patient. He spoke often with Magnaris, appealing to the warrior's better nature, urging humility, reminding him of Cybertron's fall when ambition and tyranny destroyed freedom. But every word Optimus offered was twisted in Magnaris's mind by the warp's insidious whispers. To him, Optimus no longer seemed a savior. He seemed weak, bound by compassion that had no place in a galaxy of endless war. Magnaris's following grew. Loyal soldiers who had once sworn themselves to Optimus began drifting toward his banner, drawn by his fiery speeches and promises of survival through discipline. They trained with ruthless efficiency, their voices chanting oaths, not of freedom, but of obedience. Optimus saw the shift but refused to crush it. Freedom of choice was his creed, and he believed even dissent could coexist within unity. But in the hushed corners of barracks and aboard distant starships, a dangerous idea took root. Perhaps the Meshing God was not the leader humanity needed. Perhaps his greatest warrior, the unbreakable Blade, should claim the mantle instead. Magnaris's doubts no longer remained whispers confined to council debates or mess hall arguments. They became doctrine. What began as quiet discontent hardened into a philosophy. Survival demanded strength, not compassion. He gathered loyal soldiers in secret, choosing those disillusioned by the heavy toll of Optimus' mercy. In the dark of training grounds, far from their prime's watchful gaze, he spoke to them with fiery conviction. "Optimus believes mercy will save us," Magnaris told them, "but mercy only leaves us bleeding. Chaos laughs at our weakness. If we are to endure, we must become stronger than the stars themselves, not protectors, rulers, not guardians, masters." The soldiers listened, torn between loyalty to their prime and admiration for Magnaris's certainty. Slowly, they began to shift, their faith in Optimus dimming. They trained differently, not as defenders but as conquerors. Discipline became harsh, punishment severe, obedience demanded at every step. Where the Autobot legions fought for honor, these new warriors fought for a dominion. Magnaris named them the Iron Legion. Their sigil was a twisted variation of the Autobot emblem, sharper, angular, marked with a line of crimson as if cut by a blade. At first, they kept this banner hidden, but it appeared more and more in their secret gatherings, painted on armor and carved into walls. The message was clear: the Iron Legion was no longer simply part of Optimus' Imperium. It was something new, something dangerous. Their influence spread quickly. On colonies weary of constant attacks, Magnari's promises resonated. Optimus speaks of freedom, his envoys told governors, but freedom leaves you vulnerable. Only through strength, order, and fear can you survive. These words fell like sparks on dry grass. Some colonies, desperate for protection, began quietly swearing allegiance to the Iron Legion, believing their ruthless philosophy offered safety the Prime's mercy could not guarantee. Chaos fanned the flames. Cultists infiltrated the Legion, whispering that Magnaris' destiny was greater than Optimus. They twisted his pride, feeding visions of himself crowned as humanity's true savior. Magnaris listened, half believing, half denying, but always moving closer to the abyss. He told himself he was not serving chaos, he was serving humanity. Yet the line blurred with every step. Optimus began to sense the fracture. Reports reached him of colonies adopting stricter laws under Magnaris' influence, of soldiers speaking with more fear of punishment than loyalty. He confronted his commander privately, optics glowing with disappointment rather than anger. "Your strength is admirable, Magnaris," Optimus said, "but you are walking a dangerous path. Do not mistake fear for loyalty, or obedience for unity." Magnaris met his gaze without flinching. "And do not mistake mercy for survival," he replied coldly. "One day your ideals will cost us everything. When that day comes, I will not let humanity fall because you are too gentle to do what must be done." Optimus did not strike him down. He could not. Freedom of choice was his creed, even for those who chose to dissent. Instead, he hoped dialogue would restore his commander's faith. But this compassion blinded him to the storm already forming. The Iron Legion moved from whispers to action. Colonies once loyal to Terra began refusing council edicts, claiming allegiance only to Magnaris. Autobot patrols vanished into silence, their bodies later discovered with the Iron Legion's crimson-marked sigil carved into their armor. Rumors of Optimus' failures spread like poison, that he could not protect the frontier, that his mercy doomed humanity, that Magnaris was the only leader strong enough to ensure survival. And still, Optimus hesitated. He could not bring himself to crush his own warriors, to silence voices he had once called brothers. His refusal to act decisively gave the Iron Legion time to grow bold. They moved in shadows, swelling in number, until their rebellion no longer needed to be hidden. The first banners of the Iron Legion flew openly above a captured colony. Their soldiers declared independence, their voices ringing with Magnaris' creed of order through strength. It was no longer dissent. It was open defiance. For Optimus, the truth became undeniable. The brother he had once trusted most had turned against him. The Iron Legion was not a rumor or a shadow, it was a rival empire, born within his own. And soon, the clash between ideals would erupt into war. The First War fought not against alien horrors or demonic legions, but against humanity itself, began under banners that once shared the same creed. The Autobot legions, protectors of freedom, now stood divided. Where once they had trained shoulder to shoulder, they now faced each other across burning plains. Their weapons raised not against chaos but against their own brothers and sisters. The Iron Legions struck first. Colonies under their sway declared full independence, rallying around Magnaris as their savior. They broadcast messages across the stars, denouncing Optimus as a false messenger whose mercy would doom mankind. Their propaganda showed images of burned cities and dead soldiers, blaming his restraint for every loss. On frontier worlds where fear outweighed hope, many believed. Soon battle lines were drawn, and Optimus had no choice but to march against those he had once called kin. The clash was apocalyptic. Human armies enhanced with Cybertronian technology faced mirror images of themselves. The disciplined, merciless Iron Legion. Autobot Blue clashed with Iron Crimson, and the skies were filled with fire as starships rained destruction upon cities below. Entire settlements became battlefields. their shining towers collapsing under bombardment. Civilians fled in terror, caught between two visions of humanity's future: freedom or obedience. At the heart of the war stood Optimus and Magnaris. Their duel became the symbol of the conflict, two titans embodying opposing ideals. Optimus fought with precision, his every strike aimed to disable rather than destroy. Magnaris fought with fury, his blade a storm of fire, his voice a roar of scorn. "Your mercy is weakness," he thundered as their blades clashed, sparks scattering like stars across the battlefield. "You let chaos fester while you cradle cowards. Humanity needs strength, not hope." Optimus blocked the blow, his optics burning with sorrow. "Strength without mercy is tyranny. You would save humanity only to enslave it." His words carried pain, for he still saw in Magnaris the warrior he had once trusted, the soldier who had saved countless lives. "Even in battle," he pleaded, "you are better than this. Do not let pride bind you to the warp's lies." But Magnaris laughed bitterly. "You call them lies? They showed me the truth. Humanity will never survive your dream." With a final surge, he drove Optimus back, their duel shaking the ground beneath their feet. Around them, the legions slaughtered one another, the cries of the dying mingling with the thunder of artillery. The battle raged for hours, each side unwilling to yield. In the end, Optimus' resolve outlasted Magnaris' fury. With one mighty strike, he disarmed his former brother, sending the crimson-marked blade tumbling into the rubble. Magnaris fell to his knees, his armor cracked, his body battered. The Autobot legions rallied at the sight, pressing forward to drive the Iron Legion into retreat. The field was won, but it was not a victory. Optimus stood over Magnaris, his own blade poised for the final blow. His commanders shouted for him to end it, to destroy the traitor before he rose again. But Optimus hesitated. He looked into Magnaris' eyes and saw not only defiance, but the faint glimmer of the man he had once been. Slowly, he lowered his weapon. "I will not kill you," he said quietly. "Not while there is still a spark within you that can be saved." Instead of execution, he ordered Magnaris bound and taken alive. The war ended that day, but the cost was beyond reckoning. Thousands lay dead, their bodies scattered across the ruins of once thriving cities. Families mourned brothers who had killed brothers, fathers who had slaughtered sons. The trust that had bound the Imperium together was fractured, replaced with suspicion and grief. Even among the victors, whispers of doubt spread. If the legions themselves could turn, what hope did humanity have against the endless tide of the galaxy? As the fires burned and survivors wept, Optimus stood alone on the battlefield. The silence of victory weighed heavier than any defeat. Looking over the ruins, his voice broke into a whisper, meant for no one but himself. "Even freedom carries chains." His creed had survived the battle, but it had not emerged unscarred. For the first time, Optimus wondered if his ideals could truly withstand the galaxy's darkness. The smoke of civil war lingered long after the fires were extinguished. Cities once gleaming with the promise of a new Imperium now lay scarred, their towers shattered, their streets littered with the rubble of betrayal. Where banners of unity had flown, only ashes and silence remained. Survivors moved through the ruins with hollow eyes, their grief as heavy as the weight of stone they carried to rebuild. Optimus Prime walked among them. Unlike the Emperor of Mankind, who had ruled from a throne of gold and silence, Optimus descended into the dust with his people. His massive hands lifted collapsed beams from fallen homes. His frame knelt in the debris to help unearth survivors. To children, his presence was still awe-inspiring, but to adults, his presence was a reminder of the war's cost. He was their guardian, yes, but also the figure whose ideals had allowed brother to turn against brother. In every world touched by rebellion, Optimus ordered memorials raised. Not triumphal monuments to his victories, but quiet places of remembrance. Names of the fallen, Autobot and Iron Legion alike, were carved into stone so that the galaxy would never forget. "We cannot heal by forgetting," he declared at one such dedication, his voice heavy with sorrow. "We honor freedom by honoring every choice, even those that wounded us. If we erase the past, we doom ourselves to repeat it." His words inspired some, but unsettled others. Many nodded with reverence, clinging to his compassion as proof that humanity still had a soul worth saving. Yet for those who had lost families, his refusal to condemn Magnaris utterly or to erase his memory felt like betrayal. "Why honor traitors?" Grieving parents whispered. "Why forgive those who slaughtered our children?" The Emperor of mankind would have silenced such voices with fire and decree. Optimus, instead, listened. He allowed dissent to breathe, even when it wounded him, because to suppress it would be to betray his creed. But freedom cuts both ways. In the open air of liberty, whispers of doubt grew louder. Council chambers filled with heated arguments. Was Optimus' mercy the very weakness that endangered them all? Should humanity embrace a harsher order to prevent another rebellion? Optimus stood firm, but each debate left him wearier, as if every word chipped away at the foundation of his vision. The Autobot legions, too, bore scars. Many had fought their own brothers during the Civil War, and though they obeyed Optimus' call for unity, their trust in one another faltered. Squads once bound by camaraderie now trained in tense silence. Some carried guilt for the blood they had spilled, others whispered that the Iron Legion's vision had not been entirely wrong. Even among his most loyal, Optimus sensed the cracks widening. And yet, amid despair, there were sparks of resilience. Rebuilt cities began to rise from ashes. Colonies scarred by rebellion forged stronger bonds with terror, determined to prove loyalty anew. Families clung to Optimus' presence, seeing in him not perfection but perseverance. His speeches, though quieter now, carried a deeper gravity. He no longer spoke only of hope, he spoke of endurance. The cost of freedom is great, he told the people of Erythra, rebuilt from the ruins of war. But chains cost more. We stumble, we bleed, we fall, yet we rise again. That is what it means to endure. Still, the cracks were undeniable. Optimus refused to silence them, believing open wounds must be seen before they could heal. But in the warp, the gods of chaos watched with glee. For them, every doubt was not a wound to heal but a door to pry open. And as humanity mourned and rebuilt, whispers of darker faiths crept once more into the cracks of the Imperium. In the wake of the Civil War, humanity's grief and uncertainty sought meaning. Where Optimus Prime offered guidance, many sought something more: certainty, ritual, and divine explanation. It began with hymns sung in ruined streets, voices rising in prayer not to the Creator, but to the machine guard of terror. Optimus Prime, they cried, the Lightbringer, the savior of flesh and steel. Shrines were built, at first simple carvings in stone, later elaborate temples adorned with glowing circuitry salvaged from Cybertronian relics. People came to kneel before them, offering thanks and pleading for salvation. At first, Optimus tolerated these devotions, uneasy but unwilling to silence them. He had not come to be worshipped, but to guide. I am not your god, he told the crowds. I am only a guardian, a soldier who walks beside you. Yet his words did little to quell the fervor. For many, he was no longer merely a leader. He was myth made flesh, proof that humanity had not been abandoned to the void. But as reverence grew, so too did corruption. Across colonies, rival cults emerged. Some exalted him with fanatical zealotry, twisting his creed of freedom into absolute devotion. They called themselves the Children of the Light, declaring that all who questioned Optimus' wisdom were heretics to be purged. Others painted him as a false savior, a demon machine sent to deceive humanity. These whispered prayers to darker gods, their rituals mocking his creed, their banners marked with broken Autobot sigils drenched in blood. The Chaos gods laughed. For every hymn of praise, there was a whisper of blasphemy. For every shrine of hope, there was an altar of corruption. Tezinch in particular delighted in the paradox. Optimus, who despised tyranny, now found his very ideals twisted into chains of fanaticism. The Changer of Ways whispered to cult leaders, urging them to sow division in his name. Khorne feasted on the blood spilled when rival cults clashed in his shadow. And across the warp, echoes of laughter resounded. Humanity was tearing itself apart, not with blades alone, but with belief. Optimus felt the weight of it keenly. Reports from governors grew grim. Riots sparked between zealots and skeptics. Temples turned into battlegrounds, and entire colonies paralyzed by religious strife. The council urged decisive action. Some demanded he outlaw worship entirely, fearing it would fracture the Imperium. Others urged him to embrace it, to allow humanity to unite under the cult of the Machine God. Both options cut against Optimus' creed. To outlaw belief would be tyranny. To accept it would be a lie. In one of the largest shrines, Optimus himself appeared, towering above a sea of kneeling worshippers. They wept and shouted, calling him Lord of Stars and God of Freedom. His optics dimmed with sorrow as he raised his voice. I am no god, he declared. Do not bind yourselves to me as idols. Bind yourselves to one another, to the ideals of unity, compassion, and freedom." Yet even as he spoke, the people only shouted louder, taking his refusal as further proof of divinity. For them, humility was the greatest sign of godhood. Worse still were the cults of denial. On frontier worlds, prophets of chaos spread their poison, painting Optimus as a false idol who shackled humanity to weakness. "The true machine god waits beyond the stars," they preached. "Cast down the deceiver and ascend to power unchained." These cults grew bold, blending religion with rebellion, setting fire to shrines and murdering those who refused to renounce their prime. Optimus agonized over the choice. He could crush these cults, impose silence with fire and sword, as the emperor of mankind once had. But to do so would betray his own creed, the very freedom he had sworn to protect. And so he chose restraint, speaking to his commanders with weary conviction. "Faith cannot be forced. If I silence them, I become what I most despise. Freedom is dangerous, but it must endure, even when it wounds us." His decision preserved his ideals, but at a terrible cost. Instability spread. Colonies wavered between devotion, doubt, and rebellion. The Autobot legions found themselves fighting not only demons, but mobs of misguided humans driven by belief twisted into madness. The Imperium survived, but unity frayed further, each cult, whether of light or darkness, pulling humanity away from the fragile dream Optimus had built. And in the warp, the laughter grew louder. For the Chaos Gods knew the truth. Optimus had given humanity the gift of freedom, but freedom itself could be their undoing. The warning came not as rumor, but as a scream across the void. A scout vessel, battered and half-consumed by warp fire, limped into Terra's orbit. Its crew, eyes hollow and voices trembling, brought news that chilled even the most steadfast of the council. "They are coming," the commander whispered. "A fleet vast beyond counting." The stars themselves darkened by their sails. Chaos was no longer testing the edges of Optimus' dream. It was coming to break it. Reports spread swiftly, entire systems consumed by fire, colonies erased in hours. The fleet was a monstrosity born of the warp itself, thousands of ships, each twisted into shapes that defied reason. Hulls pulsed as though alive, sprouting demonic limbs that lashed at the void. Engines screamed with the howls of trapped souls. Where Imperial ships gleamed with order, these vessels radiated madness, each a floating shrine to ruin. Even the most hardened Autobot commanders, veterans of countless battles, stared at the star charts in grim silence. Fear rippled across the Imperium. Colonies demanded stricter laws, tighter defenses, and stronger chains of command. Governors pleaded with Optimus to abandon mercy, to rule with iron and crush dissent, so that all effort could be turned toward survival. In council chambers, voices rose in desperation. "Your compassion has left us vulnerable," they cried. "If you do not seize control, the fleet will devour us all." Optimus listened in silence. He heard their fear, their anger, their desperation. But when he rose to speak, his voice carried not the steel of tyranny, but the unshakable gravity of conviction. "The enemy seeks not only to kill us, but to break who we are. If we surrender freedom for survival, then we have already lost. We will not become what we fight." His words silenced the chamber, not because they erased fear, but because they reminded his people why they had followed him in the first place. Yet words alone could not face the storm. The Autobot legions were mobilized, every ship, every soldier, every fragment of technology pressed into service. From the youngest recruit to the most battle-hardened veteran, humanity prepared for the trial of its existence. Training fields echoed with the sound of steel, shipyards blazed with frantic labor, and fleets gathered at rallying points marked by the sigil of the Autobot. Optimus himself stood at the head of these preparations. He walked among the legions, offering not promises of easy victory, but the simple truth: we will be tested as never before. Many will fall, worlds may burn, but as long as we stand together, the darkness cannot claim us all. His words carried across Vox channels to distant colonies, a beacon of hope against the despair already gnawing at the edges of the Imperium. But in his private moments, Optimus felt the weight of dread. This was no ordinary invasion. The scale was beyond anything he had faced, a galactic storm, a reckoning for daring to defy the warp. Even his spark trembled at the thought. Could compassion truly endure against a tide that sought only to consume? He pushed the doubt aside, for he knew his people could not see it. Their strength depended on his resolve. Then the day came. On the edge of human space, where the void was darkest, the warp tore open. Reality bled as 1,000 rifts split the stars, disgorging the warfleet. Ship after ship emerged, blotting out constellations, their hulls glowing with infernal fire. Demonic engines bellowed, their soundless roar echoing across the void in psychic waves that reached even terror. To look upon the fleet was to feel madness gnaw at the edges of the mind. In his flagship, Optimus stood at the command dais, optics locked on the encroaching storm. His legions awaited his word, fear heavy in their hearts, but steadied by his presence. The void outside darkened as though the universe itself had drawn its last breath. Optimus placed his hand upon his blade and whispered, not as a god, but as a soldier who bore the weight of countless lives. "We stand together," he said, voice low but carried across the fleet by comms, or not at all. The battle for humanity's soul was about to begin. The void itself became a battlefield. When the Chaos Fleet tore through reality, the stars vanished behind a tide of nightmare vessels. They stretched across the heavens like a storm without end, their twisted hulls alive with demonic fire. Some writhed as if built of flesh, others shrieked through the void with psychic howls. Against them, humanity's fleets gathered, a patchwork of ships forged with Cybertronian guidance, sleek and radiant compared to the grotesque monstrosities before them. Their engines burned bright, their hulls bearing the Autobot sigil like a promise against the dark. At the heart of the formation stood Optimus' flagship, a colossal dreadnought born of human steel fused with Cybertronian technology. From its command dais, Optimus surveyed the storm. His optics dimmed as he took in the impossible scale. This was no raid, no skirmish, it was annihilation given form. Yet his voice, steady as a mountain, rang through the calms. Hold fast. You are the shield of humanity. Today the void itself shall hear our defiance. The battle ignited. Lances of plasma fire streaked across the darkness, colliding with shields that crackled like shattered glass. Autobot frigates darted between Leviathan carriers, firing salvos into demonic hulls. Chaos ships answered with torrents of warp fire, energy that bent reality itself. In seconds, vessels on both sides erupted into blossoms of flame, their death scattering debris across the void. Optimus coordinated the defense with precision. His fleets moved like extensions of his will, weaving through warp storms and countering enemy maneuvers with uncanny foresight. Cybertronian algorithms calculated firing arcs, while human intuition exploited weaknesses in chaos formations. Under his command, victories flickered across the board. A corrupted battleship torn apart by focused fire, a demonic cruiser shattered by coordinated torpedo runs. But for every triumph, losses mounted. Chaos did not fight with strategy, it fought with madness. Their ships threw themselves into collisions, ramming human vessels and tearing both apart in suicidal frenzy. Warp storms rippled unpredictably, swallowing entire squadrons in an instant. Colonies below watched their skies burn as flaming wreckage rained from orbit. Civilians huddled in fear, whispering prayers to the machine god while explosions lit the heavens above. The Council urged Optimus to sacrifice weak sectors, to abandon civilians in order to preserve strength. He refused. Time and again, he redirected fleets to shield refugee transports and colony stations. Even when it forced costly retreats, his commanders warned him the price was unsustainable. "Every ship we lose saving stragglers weakens the line," one officer argued. Optimus' reply was quiet, resolute. "If we abandon the innocent, we become no better than the monsters we fight. Survival without compassion is not victory." The consequences were brutal. Entire flotillas broke apart, covering evacuation routes. Autobot legions aboard escort craft fought to the last man to protect fleeing transports. Each sacrifice bought moments. Each loss carved wounds deeper into the Imperium's heart. Still, Optimus held the line, his presence a rallying beacon. His voice thundered across calms as ships faltered. "Stand, stand, stand for every spark that still burns." The climax of the battle came when a Chaos flagship, a colossal vessel swollen with demonic essence, emerged at the center of the storm. Its hull seethed with warp flesh, mouths screaming as they devoured their own crew for fuel. It dwarfed even Optimus' dreadnought, its shadow blotting out the stars. Colonists below watched it rise like a dark god across their skies, despair gripping their hearts. Optimus met it head-on, his fleet concentrated fire, hammering its shields until cracks split across its living hull. The monster ship retaliated with warp lances that pierced entire squadrons in a single strike. The void itself seemed to scream as the two giants clashed. Finally, with a command that shook his fleet, Optimus ordered every available ship to focus fire on the beast. Streams of plasma, torpedoes, and railfire converged, tearing into the abomination until it ruptured in a storm of blood and flame, its death echoing like a psychic scream across the galaxy. The victory came at staggering cost. Dozens of human ships drifted in silence, their crews gone. The fleets held, but barely. Optimus stood at the command dais, his optics reflecting the burning wreckage scattered across the void. The stars returned as the warp storm ebbed, but they shone cold and distant, offering no comfort. And yet his voice rang out, steady and unbroken. We endure, not for conquest, not for power. We endure for one another. Let the galaxy remember, humanity will not bow. The void was theirs, but the war was only beginning. The void battle was only the beginning. When Chaos warships broke through the defensive lines, they unleashed their true horror upon the colonies below. From ruptured landing craft poured demons, their forms twisting reality with every step. Traitor Marines clad in jagged armor followed, their eyes burning with the warp's fire, their voices chanting praises to gods of blood and madness. Cities once rebuilt with hope became killing fields in an instant. The Autobot Legion stood as humanity's shield. Armored in gleaming plates enhanced with Cybertronian technology, they met the tide head-on. Their battle cries echoed Optimus' creed, freedom, unity, hope. But those words were drowned in the roar of chainswords and the shrieks of the damned. Streets collapsed under bombardment, towers crumbled in fire, and the very air turned poisonous with warp taint. Optimus descended into the fray himself, his towering frame carving paths through demonic hosts. His blade cleaved through monstrosities that would have driven lesser men mad, his voice urging civilians to flee even as the ground split beneath them. Around him, the Autobot legions fought with desperate valor. They formed shields around refugee convoys, their own lives spent as barricades against the tide. Entire squads were annihilated holding evacuation corridors, their sacrifice ensuring that children and families escaped into orbit. But mercy carried a cost. Each time Optimus diverted forces to protect civilians, battle lines faltered elsewhere. Chaos exploited every gap, their warriors pouring into undefended streets, slaughtering those too slow to flee. Commanders begged Optimus to strike back with overwhelming force, to unleash fire that would annihilate enemies and innocents alike in a single blow. He refused. Every spark matters, he said, his optics burning with conviction. If we sacrifice the innocent for victory, then we are no better than the darkness we fight. Yet his soldiers began to question. In trenches filled with blood, as comrades fell beside them, whispers spread. Was compassion worth this endless slaughter? Would a harsher hand have spared more lives in the long run? The tension grew even as the legions fought with unmatched courage, their doubts gnawing at the edges of their loyalty. The battles dragged on for days. On the colony of Halcyon, the Autobot legions repelled wave after wave, only for demonic engines to rise from the warp, towering monstrosities that reduced entire districts to ash. Optimus rallied his forces again and again, each victory carved from sacrifice. But the losses were staggering. When dawn rose over Halcyon's ruins, half the city lay buried beneath rubble, and the legions counted their dead by the thousands. Survivors knelt before Optimus in gratitude, but their tearful thanks felt like daggers. For every life saved, another had been lost. By the end, humanity had won small, bitter victories. The demonic tide was pushed back, the traitor Marines routed, and colonies still stood where ruin had seemed inevitable. But the price was visible in every haunted soldier's eyes, in every grieving family huddled in refugee camps, in every burned name etched into makeshift memorials. Optimus stood among the survivors, his blade still dripping with the eye-care of demons, his massive frame scarred by battle. Around him, children clung to their parents, soldiers stood bloodied but unbroken. He looked at them not with triumph, but with quiet sorrow. "The galaxy will test us again and again," he said, his voice low yet steady. "But as long as even one spark endures, humanity's light will not be extinguished." The Autobot legions cheered, their voices hoarse but resolute. For a moment, hope flickered once more in the ashes of despair. Yet beneath the cheering lay unease. For all their courage, for all their sacrifices, the question lingered. Could mercy truly survive in a galaxy built on hell? The battlefield roared with chaos. Across burning streets and shattered towers, demons clashed with the Autobot legions in carnage that turned cities into hellscapes. Yet even amidst that storm of fire and blood, a greater shadow fell. The ground quaked as a figure emerged from the warp itself, a champion of chaos, a warlord infused with demonic essence. His armor writhed with living symbols of corruption, horns twisted skyward, and his colossal blade burned with the souls of the damned. To the terrified colonists who glimpsed him, he was no mere foe. He was an apocalypse given form. The demon champion's voice thundered across the battlefield, deeper than any human throat could produce. Machine god of flesh and steel, he roared, eyes aflame with warp fire. You are no savior. You are a lie. A husk clinging to mercy in a galaxy built for dominion. I am the true ruler of mankind. Kneel, and I shall let your people live. Optimus Prime stepped forward, towering above even the tallest warriors, his blade ignited with crackling blue fire. Around him, the Autobot legions faltered, giving him space. His optics burned not with rage, but with steady sorrow. I will never kneel to tyranny, he said, his voice resonant, carrying across the battlefield. I fight not for power, but for freedom. Their clash shook the colony. The demon champion's sword descended with the force of mountains collapsing, meeting Optimus' blade in an explosion of light and shadow. The ground split beneath their feet. Buildings toppled from the shockwaves. Soldiers and civilians alike scattered, watching from afar as titans battled amidst the ruins of humanity's hope. The demon pressed forward, each striking a storm of fury. His blade screamed with the agony of enslaved souls, and every swing threatened to consume Optimus whole. Optimus blocked, countered, staggered, his massive form dented and scorched. Sparks burst from his armor, energon spilling into the dirt. For a moment, it seemed even he might fall. The champion mocked him with every blow. See how your mercy weakens you. See how your compassion bleeds you dry. The galaxy will never be saved by kindness, only by chains and fire. He struck again, driving Optimus to his knees, his blade pressing close to the Prime's chest. But Optimus' optics flared brighter, and his voice thundered across the battlefield. Compassion is not weakness, it is strength. Freedom is not frailty. It is the fire that no darkness can extinguish. Summoning the last reserves of his might, he surged upward, pushing back against the demon's corrupted blade. With a roar, he drove his fist into the champion's chest, shattering armor, and sent the monster staggering. The duel raged on, blow after blow, sparks and fire lighting the night sky. Finally, with one final strike, Optimus raised his blade high and brought it down with a cry that echoed across the galaxy. For freedom. The blade pierced the demon champion's heart, flooding it with searing light. The warlord screamed as his form unraveled, collapsing into smoke and shadow before being torn back into the warp. The battlefield fell silent. Demons shrieked and dissolved, their anchor broken. Traitor marines faltered, fleeing back toward their ships. The Autobot legions, battered and blooded, raised their weapons in weary triumph. The invasion had been repelled. Humanity has survived, but Optimus did not lift his blade in celebration. He stood amidst the ruins, his armor scarred, his energon leaking, his optics dim with sorrow. Around him lay the bodies of countless fallen soldiers who had died for hope, civilians who had never been saved. The victory was undeniable, yet its cost was unbearable. Optimus fell to one knee, his hand pressed into the earth. He whispered, almost too softly for even his closest warriors to hear, "How many more must fall before hope breaks?" The Autobot legions looked to him as unbreakable, a godlike savior who could not be defeated. Yet within his spark, grief gnawed at him, heavier than any blade. For the people, it was a triumph. For Optimus, it was another chain added to the weight of his creed. The fires of battle had dimmed, but their smoke still clung to the skies. Worlds once radiant with the promise of renewal now lay broken, their cities little more than blackened husks. Towers that had symbolized humanity's rise into the stars stood as hollow shells, their steel spires bent and scorched. Streets once filled with children's laughter were now lined with the rubble of collapsed homes, the air heavy with silence broken only by the sobs of survivors. In every colony touched by the war, grief was the dominant tongue. Families gathered in ruins, clutching what little remained of their lives. Entire communities were displaced, reduced to wandering bands of refugees moving from world to world in search of shelter. The Autobot legions, once a shining symbol of unity, marched home in fractured numbers, their banners tattered, their voices hushed with the weight of loss. The cost of survival had been victory, but it had left scars deeper than any blade. Optimus Prime walked among the survivors, his colossal frame stooped as if burdened by the sorrow of millions. He lifted debris with his hands, not as a warrior but as a laborer, uncovering survivors or recovering the fallen. His presence inspired awe, but not all awe was comfort. To some he was salvation embodied, the one who had stood between humanity and extinction. To others, his shadow was a reminder of promises unkept, of loved ones lost in wars fought under his creed of mercy. Monuments rose quickly, not monuments of triumph, but of remembrance. On Terra, vast memorial walls were etched with the names of fallen soldiers, each letter a life extinguished in the void or upon the burning ground. On other worlds, statues of Autobots stood solemnly, weapons lowered, their heads bowed in mourning. Optimus himself presided over the dedication of one such memorial. His voice trembled with sorrow as he said, "These were not mere soldiers. They were sparks of hope, extinguished but never forgotten. Humanity endures because of their sacrifice. May we honor them not with silence, but with remembrance." Yet remembrance alone could not heal the wounds. Survivors whispered their doubts. In hushed tones, in crowded shelters, questions spread like smoke through a burned city. Why had Optimus not chosen ruthless victory? Why had he sacrificed entire fleets to save civilians, when total annihilation of Chaos forces might have spared countless lives later? Was compassion truly worth the millions of dead now lying in unmarked graves across the stars? The Council, too, was divided. Some praised Optimus' vision, calling his refusal to abandon humanity's soul the very reason the Imperium still stood. Others criticized him sharply, demanding he adopt harsher laws and stricter command to prevent such losses in the future. Every word of dissent was a dagger, for Optimus knew that their accusations carried truth. He had chosen mercy, and mercy had cost dearly. In private, he bore the guilt alone. When the night was still and the stars looked cold, he knelt among the memorial stones, laying his hand upon the names of the fallen. His voice, usually thunderous, broke into a whisper, "I should have saved you, all of you." His commanders tried to assure him that the burden was not his alone, but Optimus carried it nonetheless, as if every lost spark dimmed the fire within his chest. For the people, he remained both hope and doubt. To some, his presence was proof that even in ruin, humanity could endure. To others, he was a flawed guardian, too compassionate for a galaxy that demanded cruelty. Either way, his idealism was no longer unquestioned. The Imperium had endured, but cracks had deepened. And in those cracks, whispers stirred, of faith, of rebellion, of futures where Optimus was no longer humanity's unchallenged savior. In the shadow of ruins, faith began to bloom, not in silence, but in chants, prayers, and hymns. Survivors, their hearts fractured by grief, sought meaning in the storm that had nearly consumed them, and where once they had turned to nameless gods or distant myths, now their eyes turned to the towering figure who had bled and fought in the void beside them. Optimus Prime, savior of worlds, became more than a leader. To many, he became eternal. The first whispers called him the Prime Eternal. Sermons rose in refugee camps, preachers declaring that no mortal could endure the wounds he had, nor rally armies in the face of such horror. They cited his refusal to bow before the demon champion as proof of divinity, his words of freedom as scripture. Hymns were crafted from fragments of his speeches, sung in temples made of broken stone and melted steel. "We endure together, or not at all" became a creed repeated by millions, etched into walls and carried in song across worlds. Optimus rejected this fervor. "I am not your god," he said again and again, his voice filled with sorrow. "I am a soldier. I am a guardian. Nothing more." But his humility only deepened their devotion. To them, denial was the final proof. Only a true god would refuse to claim divinity, choosing instead to walk among mortals. His rejection became scripture in itself, cited as evidence of his sacred nature. The Autobot legions grew uneasy. Some embraced the cult, seeing in it a force that united broken colonies and inspired resilience. Others distrusted it, fearing it would distort Optimus' vision. Council chambers fractured further, with debates raging over whether to suppress the faith or allow it to spread. "Religion is dangerous," one governor warned. "It binds men, but it blinds them as well. Today they worship him for freedom. Tomorrow they will kill in his name." Optimus himself remained torn. Freedom demanded that humanity be allowed to believe as they willed. To silence faith would be tyranny. Yet he saw the danger clear as day. Already sermons exaggerated his words, painting him not as a protector but as a god-king, a being whose will was law. His ideals of freedom and compassion risked being twisted into dogma and oppression, the very tyranny he opposed. Chaos, ever watchful, fanned the embers of division. Cultists infiltrated congregations, twisting sermons subtly. "Yes, he is divine," they whispered. "But what if his mercy blinds him? What if he cannot protect you? What if his light falters?" Some cults twisted into fanaticism, demanding all colonies swear loyalty not to Optimus' ideals, but to his name. Others mutated into heresies, declaring that the true Prime had yet to reveal himself, that the one they followed was a false idol sent to deceive. Faith, once a comfort, became another battlefield. Optimus bore it silently. He walked among the worshippers, offering blessings not as a god, but as a leader trying to remind them of their humanity. He allowed their hymns, their prayers, even their temples, for to forbid them would betray freedom. Yet in private he confided to his closest allies. "I fear what this will become," he admitted, optics dim with unease. "Faith is a double-edged blade. Today it binds them. Tomorrow it may enslave them. If I become their god, I cease to be their guardian." The tension deepened as the cult of the Prime spread from colony to colony. On Terra, entire districts were transformed into shrines, their streets filled with banners bearing Optimus' visage. On frontier worlds, missionaries carried his words, building loyalty through devotion. Unity grew, but so did fanaticism, and Optimus knew that while the faith gave hope, it also planted seeds of future tyranny. Above all, chaos smiled. The gods saw a future where humanity's hope would be twisted into chains, where hymns of freedom would become chants of control. And they whispered to their pawns, waiting for the day when the cult of the Prime would fracture the Imperium from within. The interrogations began quietly. Captured cultists, their minds half consumed by the warp, muttered fragments of prophecy between screams and madness. At first, their words seemed incoherent, riddles of fire, steel, and an eternal foundry. But as more prisoners were questioned, a pattern emerged. Again and again, they spoke of a world where machines breathed corruption, where forges were no longer built for survival, but for destruction. Scouts were dispatched into the outer systems, braving warp storms that crackled with psychic residue left by the Chaos Fleet. Weeks later, a transmission returned, fractured by static and fear. The images it carried froze every council chamber. There, at the edge of a dead system, hung a forge world once thought lost in humanity's ancient wars. Its titanic factories still towered above the planet's scorched surface, but no longer did their fires burn with industry alone. They pulsed with warp energy, their smokestacks belching not smoke but living shadow. Machines worked endlessly, their forms twisted by demonic influence. Weapons unlike anything humanity had seen were being forged. Cannons that shrieked with voices, tanks with flesh fused into their armor, ships birthed not in dry docks but in rituals of blood. The sight confirmed the truth. The Chaos War Fleet had not been the endgame. It had been a distraction, a bloody spectacle meant to draw Optimus and his legions away while something far darker was prepared. The corrupted Forge world was not merely a factory, it was a weapon of galactic annihilation. In council chambers, panic spread. Some urged immediate annihilation, demanding orbital bombardment to reduce the world to ash before its horrors spread. Others argued for seizing it, to claim the technology and turn it against chaos. The debates grew heated, voices rising in desperation. "If they complete their work, no fleet, we must stop them," one commander warned. "But if we destroy it outright, we may never match their strength again." Optimus listened, his optics dim with the weight of choice. He remembered Cybertron, how unchecked ambition had torn his own world apart. He saw the temptation of such power, but also the corruption it carried. "If we wield their weapons," he said slowly, his voice echoing through the chamber, "we risk becoming the very evil we oppose. Yet if we do nothing, the galaxy burns." The dilemma was clear. Humanity's survival might hinge not only on defeating chaos in battle, but on ensuring their technology never poisoned the Imperium. For the first time since his arrival, Optimus felt the sharp edge of doubt pierce his resolve. He had led his people through war, through betrayal, through fire and blood. But could even his ideals withstand this? Preparations began immediately. Scouts charted hidden routes into the corrupted system, while the Autobot legions reforged their ranks, even as their numbers dwindled from recent wars. Every colony was warned. The coming campaign might decide the fate of the Imperium itself. That night, Optimus stood alone aboard his flagship, gazing through the observation deck into the endless stars. The reflection in the glass stared back at him, his own armored frame, scarred and worn, burdened with expectation. He raised a hand, touching the cold surface, as though reaching for an answer beyond himself. "Am I guiding them?" he whispered, his voice heavy with grief and uncertainty, or failing them. The stars offered no reply. Only silence. Only the endless void that now hid a world of living machines building nightmares to consume humanity. The campaign for the corrupted Forge world had begun. The descent began in silence. The Autobot fleets pierced the veil of warp storms surrounding the corrupted Forge world, their engines thrumming like hearts beating against the abyss. From orbit, the planet itself was a nightmare, a sphere of iron and shadow, its surface scarred with rivers of molten metal that glowed like open wounds. Vast manufactories sprawled across continents, their chimneys belching black smoke into the void. But these were not factories of men. They pulsed, writhed, and screamed. Flesh fused with iron, machines groaned with demonic hunger, and entire cities seemed alive, their walls beating like organs in time with the planet's heart. As the first landers breached the atmosphere, the scale of corruption became clear. Towers of steel had been reshaped into grotesque statues, their forms half machine, half demon, watching the skies with eyeless sockets. Rivers of oil flowed alongside streams of blood. Every structure bore the stench of blasphemy. Every echo carried the whispers of chaos. The Autobot legions disembarked into hell. Armored soldiers advanced across broken plains, their banners snapping defiantly in the toxic wind. But their defiance faltered as the defenders appeared. Out of the smog marched the twisted guardians of the Forge, machines fused with demonic essence, their limbs ending in claws of molten steel, their weapons screaming with bound souls. Some were once humans, now enslaved and grafted into engines of war, their faces frozen in agony as their bodies became living weapons. Others were constructed beyond reason, tanks that crawled like beasts, aircraft with wings of bone and metal, titans whose frames dripped ichor instead of oil. The first clash was apocalyptic. Autobot bolters and plasma fire cut through corrupted machines, but for every horror destroyed, another emerged from the factories. Warp-forged cannons spat fire that bent reality, tearing squads apart in flashes of impossible light. The very ground rebelled, swallowing men whole as it split open to reveal veins of molten corruption. Even the air seemed hostile, heavy with whispers that gnawed at courage. Optimus Prime led from the front. His frame strode through firestorms, his blade cleaving through monstrosities that would have broken lesser warriors' minds. Yet even he felt the weight of the Forge pressing against him, a place where freedom seemed alien, and hope fragile. He raised his voice across the comms, a steady beacon in the storm. "Hold fast. The darkness seeks to unmake you, but you are more than steel and flesh. You are humanity's fire, and it will not be extinguished here." His words steadied many, but not all. Some soldiers faltered, dropping to their knees as the horrors pressed too close. Others broke, their sanity shattered by the sight of humans twisted into machines of suffering. "Mercy means nothing here," one commander muttered bitterly as his squad fell around him. "This world is proof that the galaxy belongs to monsters." The Autobot legions pressed on regardless, their march marked by sacrifice. Every step forward was bought with blood. The factories screamed as they fought, their walls shuddering with the thunder of demonic forges producing new abominations even as the battle raged outside. It was war against the world itself, a living engine of despair. From above, orbiting fleets unleashed bombardments against defensive batteries, but the Forge resisted with sorcery, its shields alive with warp energy. Columns of fire rose into the skies, striking ships from the heavens. The invasion became not a swift strike, but a grinding struggle against a foe that did not tire, did not fear, and did not yield. Amidst the chaos, Optimus paused for a moment on a ridge overlooking the battlefield. His optics scanned the endless factories, the rivers of fire, the enslaved faces fused into iron walls. He felt sorrow rise within him, heavier than any blade. This was not just a battle for survival. This was a battle against the very corruption of creation itself. His ideals, forged in compassion and freedom, seemed fragile against a world built on torment. Yet he clenched his fist around his blade and stepped forward once more. "Can light survive?" he whispered, his voice lost beneath the roar of the forge. "In a world built of darkness." The only answer was the scream of machines as the war for the forge began. The deeper the Autobot legions pressed into the forge world, the louder its heart thundered. Factories screamed with the voices of the enslaved, their walls trembling with demonic fury. At the center of this living machine lay the core foundry, a cathedral of iron and bone where titanic forges belched rivers of molten corruption into yawning chasms. And there, upon a throne of cables and flesh, awaited the Dark Mechanist. Once a tech priest of Mars, he had long since abandoned the Omnissiah's creed, fusing his body with warp-born technology. Tubes writhed from his spine like serpents, his limbs replaced by multi-jointed talons of steel and sinew. His face was a mask of iron, fused into a grin of madness with glowing eyes that radiated infernal power. Around him, enslaved humans were grafted into machines, their screams powering the forge's infernal engines. "Welcome, False Prime!" the Mechanist's voice boomed, layered with mechanical distortion and demonic echo. "You lead them with kindness, but kindness is a lie. Progress demands sacrifice. Survival demands corruption. I am the true machine god. The future you are too weak to embrace." Optimus Prime stepped forward, his towering form illuminated by the crimson glow of molten rivers. His optics burned, but his voice remained calm, resolute. "You are no god. You are a tyrant who mistakes corruption for strength. True progress does not come from cruelty. It comes from compassion, from unity, from freedom." The Mechanist's laughter rattled the forges. "Freedom is chaos. Compassion is weakness. Look around you, Prime. This is evolution. Flesh and steel as one, bound by strength, freed from morality. With my forge, I shall remake humanity into perfection, soulless, merciless, eternal." With a roar, the Mechanist unleashed his creations. Abominations of metal and flesh surged forward, their limbs replaced by weapons, their eyes hollow pits of agony. Optimus charged to meet them, his blade a burning beacon of light. He cleaved through monstrosities, his strikes precise, his every motion a declaration of defiance. The legions fought behind him, though their numbers dwindled in the endless tide. Then the Mechanist himself rose, unfolding to monstrous height, his body a fusion of machine and demon. A massive weapon arm ignited, spewing warp fire across the battlefield. With a thunderous step, he met Optimus in combat, their clash shaking the core foundry. The duel was not only of strength, but of belief. The Mechanist struck with overwhelming force, his weapons shrieking with stolen souls. "Mercy has doomed you," he bellowed as his talons tore sparks from Optimus' armor. "Every soldier you save is one more chain dragging your empire down. My way is inevitable. Cruelty is the only truth of the galaxy." Optimus staggered but did not fall. He raised his blade to block, energon dripping from his wounds. "If cruelty is truth," he answered, voice steady despite the storm, "then truth is a lie. I have seen strength in mercy. I have seen unity in freedom. That is the light I fight for, and it will never be extinguished." The Mechanist roared, striking again and again, forcing Optimus back toward the molten rivers. For a moment it seemed the Prime might fall until he planted his feet, optics blazing with defiance. With a mighty surge, he drove his blade deep into the Mechanist's chest. Energy flared, blue light clashing with crimson warp fire as the forge shook violently. "You will not remake humanity in despair," Optimus thundered, pressing forward with all his might. "You will not enslave them to your corruption." With one final strike, he tore the Mechanist apart, his body collapsing into fire and ash. The enslaved machines screamed one last time before falling silent, their bindings broken. The forges dimmed, their rivers cooling as demonic corruption was purged. The battle was won, but at terrible cost. The legions lay shattered, their numbers decimated. The core foundry stood in ruins, its liberation bought with oceans of blood. Optimus lowered his blade, his frame trembling with exhaustion and grief. Around him, freed survivors wept with relief, kneeling before their savior. Yet Optimus did not raise his hand in triumph. He gazed into the darkness of the ruined forge, his voice a whisper only he could hear. How long can hope endure in a galaxy built on despair? The forge was destroyed, but its memory would haunt him forever. The forge was destroyed, The fires that had once birthed weapons of living nightmare were reduced to silence, the screams of enslaved souls finally freed. To the Autobot legions, it was victory. To humanity, it was salvation. But to Optimus Prime, it was another scar, carved not into his armor, but into his spark. When the cheering ended and the dead were buried, he withdrew into solitude. High within the command deck of his flagship, the Light of Solace, Optimus sat in silence. Stars drifted beyond the viewport, distant and indifferent. His massive frame, once a towering beacon of unbreakable strength, seemed weighed down, his shoulders stooped, his optics dimmed. The sword that had struck down the Dark Mechanist lay across the floor, its blade scorched and blackened. Alone, he remembered. He remembered Cybertron before the fall, when its golden towers shone as a promise of eternity. He remembered the council chambers filled with hope, the dream of unity that had bound Autobots and Decepticons before war had consumed them. He remembered Megatron, brother, ally, betrayer. The words they had exchanged echoed through him. Mercy is weakness. Freedom is chaos. Now, centuries later, he heard those same words whispered by Chaos champions, repeated by his own disillusioned soldiers, and reflected in the fearful eyes of the humans he led. He placed a hand upon his chest, feeling the pulse of his spark. "Have I learned nothing?" he whispered, his voice trembling though no one was there to hear. "Have I carried the same mistake across stars, across centuries? Every time I show mercy, the galaxy bleeds. Every time I hold on to hope, darkness grows stronger. Am I saving them or dooming them?" A soft chime broke the silence. A small figure entered Ilara, one of his closest human advisors, a woman who had stood at his side since the first days of the Imperium. She approached cautiously, her voice gentle. "You've been here for days, my Prime. The legions look to you. The colonies look to you. They need your strength." Optimus did not raise his optics. "Strength? What strength remains, Ilara? I have given them freedom, and freedom has bred dissent. I have shown them mercy, and mercy has cost millions of lives. Tell me, what kind of leader cannot protect his people from the very ideals he preaches?" She said nothing for a long moment, only watching the giant who had carried humanity upon his shoulders. At last, she spoke. "The kind of leader who refuses to become a tyrant. The kind who carries the burden so that others may walk free. You do not fail us, Optimus. You remind us that even in this galaxy, compassion still exists." Her words touched him, but they did not heal. He turned his gaze back to the stars. "Compassion? Yes. But how long can compassion endure in a galaxy built for cruelty? How long before I even break?" Later, other commanders came, veterans scarred from the wars, their faith shaken but not broken. They urged him to rest, to stand tall, to continue leading. Yet he saw it in their eyes. Doubt, quiet but present. They had given everything. And still the enemy came. Even his most loyal were no longer unshaken. The cracks were there, in them and in him. Optimus bowed his head, closing his optics. For the first time in centuries, he allowed himself to feel not as a leader, not as a godlike figure, but as a weary soldier. A soldier who had fought too many wars, buried too many allies, and carried too heavy a crown. And in that moment of solitude, a question formed, one that would not leave him. Will I abandon my ideals to save humanity, or cling to them and let them die? The Forge's destruction should have united humanity. Instead, it revealed the fractures buried deep within the Imperium. Across the stars, colonies split into factions, their voices rising in defiance against one another, and against Optimus himself. On some worlds, the cult of the Prime grew to dominate, turning his speeches into scripture and his mercy into divine law. Pilgrims knelt before towering statues of his form, hymns of devotion echoing in cathedrals forged from the ruins of war. To them, Optimus was not a leader but a god walking among mortals, a being whose every word carried the weight of eternity. Yet even in their worship, his ideals twisted. Freedom became obedience, compassion became zealotry, and those who doubted his divinity were branded heretics. On other worlds, voices of resentment sharpened into rebellion. Political leaders, scarred by endless conflict, declared that Optimus' compassion had cost too much. They compared him unfavorably to the Emperor of Mankind, whose iron rule had forged a harsher but more stable imperium in another timeline. "Mercy has left us weak," one governor declared before a cheering crowd. "The galaxy respects only strength. If Prime will not rule as a god, then he is no savior. He is a tyrant too cowardly to admit it. Dissent turned violent. Riots ignited in colonies where worshippers and skeptics clashed, each side claiming to defend humanity's future. In the streets, Autobot legionnaires found themselves forced into peacekeeping roles, yet every attempt to intervene was twisted into propaganda. To some, they were guardians. To others, enforcers of a failing regime. The tension reached its peak with the first assassination attempt. During a council session on terror, a delegate drew a concealed weapon, shouting accusations that Optimus had doomed billions by refusing to wield power ruthlessly. He fired into the chamber before being struck down, his words echoing louder than his bullets. "Your mercy kills us." The event sent shockwaves across the Imperium, emboldening extremists and planting fear in every hall of governance. Whispers of chaos grew louder, hidden in the turmoil. Cultists stirred both sides, fanning the flames of division. They told worshippers that Optimus was a false idol, a puppet of darker powers. To skeptics, they whispered that his mercy was a weakness designed to deliver humanity into slavery. No matter the faction, the hand of chaos was there, unseen but ever present. Humanity itself became the battlefield, its weakness proving a sharper weapon than any demon blade. Optimus bore it with silent sorrow. He stood before divided assemblies, urging unity. But his words fell on ears already deafened by fear and suspicion. "Freedom is not weakness," he declared, his voice thundering through the chambers. "Mercy is not defeat. They are the fire that makes us human. Without them, we are only machines." Some cheered. Others jeered. And Optimus, towering though he was, felt smaller than he ever had. For centuries he had carried humanity forward through war and bloodshed, but now he saw the cracks spreading faster than his words could heal. His greatest enemy was no longer chaos armies, but humanity's own doubt, its inability to hold to unity without descending into extremes. In the quiet of his chamber, he confessed to Ilara, "I can fight armies, I can face monsters. But how do I fight the hearts of men when they tear themselves apart faster than I can bind them?" She had no answer. The Imperium trembled, not from external foes, but from within. And as the stars turned cold beyond the viewport, Optimus knew the truth. If he could not heal humanity's soul, no victory against chaos would matter. Optimus Prime sat in silence, his vast frame folded upon itself in meditation. The council chambers had gone quiet, the shouts of dissent and cries of worship echoing faintly in memory. Alone, he sought clarity. Yet clarity did not come from reason, nor from counsel, but from the veil of the warp itself. Closing his optics, he let the silence deepen. His spark pulsed faintly, resonating with the energies that swirled unseen around the galaxy. He had touched the warp before, felt its whispers in moments of battle. But now it has reached back. The stillness shattered, and in its place came visions. He found himself standing upon a broken plain of infinite stars, the sky torn between light and shadow. Before him unfolded two roads, each stretching beyond sight. At the crossroads stood no guide, no voice, only silence and the weight of choice. On the first path, he saw himself cloaked in gold and fire. The Autobot legions had become unyielding enforcers. Their banners carried not as symbols of hope, but as threats of obedience. Colonies bowed in silence, their people bound by fear rather than trust. Optimus stood above them on a throne of steel, his blade raised not in defense but in dominion. The Imperium thrived, strong, unbreakable, eternal. But the light in humanity's eyes was gone. Their freedom extinguished, their songs muted, their souls shackled in chains of survival. It was a galaxy without chaos, but also without compassion. A victory of tyranny. On the second path, the vision shifted. Optimus saw himself standing among the people, not as ruler but as guardian. His words still carried compassion, his hand still reached to lift the fallen. Humanity thrived in its diversity, free to build, to dream, to falter. But then came the darkness, fleets of chaos rising like storms across the stars, demons devouring worlds, faith turning to ash. His armies fought valiantly, but they fell one by one, overwhelmed by endless hunger. At the vision's end, he stood alone amid ruins, watching the last sparks of humanity fade into nothing, a victory of ideals ending in extinction. The two futures weighed upon him like chains. In one, survival without freedom. In the other, freedom without survival. There was no path of triumph, only tragedy carved into two different stones. A voice rose within the vision, not the dark mechanist, not Megatron, not the whispers of chaos, but something older, deeper, woven into the warp itself. Every leader bears a crown of sacrifice. You cannot save them all, Optimus Prime. You can only choose what they will remember. Chains of safety, or the light of freedom. He fell to his knees, his great hands pressing into the broken ground of the vision. There must be another way, he murmured, anguish breaking through his steady tone. I will not abandon them to slavery. I will not watch them perish. I will not choose between despair and tyranny. The stars flickered in silence, indifferent to his plea. Yet, as the vision darkened, a spark ignited within him, faint but steady. He saw, not as prophecy, but as conviction, that even if both paths ended in loss, the meaning of humanity would be defined by the road they walked. Whether they lived or died, whether they triumphed or fell, their story would be their own. He rose slowly, towering against the shifting horizon of the warp. His optics burned bright, his voice cutting through the silence. Then I choose freedom. Even in darkness, freedom must shine. If extinction is the cost, let it be with dignity, not chains. If survival is possible, it will be born not from cruelty, but from unity. The vision shattered like glass. Optimus gasped, his optics snapping open. The stars of real space gleamed once more beyond the viewport. His frame trembled, not from fear, but from the burden of what he had seen. He knew now that there was no true victory waiting at the end of this war, only the chance to define humanity's legacy. For the first time, he felt the weight of inevitability, but also the fire of resolve. The final battle loomed, and with it, the moment when his choice would define the Imperium forever. The galaxy trembled. Warp storms opened like wounds across the void, vomiting forth fleets of demonic vessels and war hosts without number. The Chaos Gods had grown tired of whispers and pawns. This was their final gambit, the complete erasure of humanity and the extinguishing of the fragile light Optimus had kindled. But before the storm broke, the call went out. From Terra to the most distant colony, a signal blazed across the stars. It carried not orders of fear, nor decrees of obedience, but the voice of a leader who had given everything to keep humanity free. Optimus Prime's message reached every world, projected into council halls, marketplaces, barracks, and even the humblest homes. His towering form appeared in shimmering light, battered but unbroken, his voice resonant and steady. People of humanity, sons and daughters of Terra, I will not deceive you. The storm that comes is unlike any we have faced. The gods of the warp themselves have set their gaze upon us. They come not to enslave us, nor to conquer us. They come to erase us, to silence our voices forever. His optics dimmed briefly, then burned brighter. And yet, I have seen your courage. I have seen mothers shielding their children beneath the fires of war. I have seen soldiers stand unflinching against horrors that defy reason. I have seen hope survive in the ashes of despair. Humanity is not weak. Humanity is not broken. Humanity is endless. Across colonies, men and women paused, their hearts quickening. Workers stopped at their machines. Soldiers froze in training yards. Even the skeptical governors leaned forward, drawn in by the weight of his words. Freedom is not free, Optimus declared, his voice like thunder rolling across the stars. It demands sacrifice. It demands struggle. But it is worth every drop of blood, every tear, every spark of life laid down so that others may endure. I cannot promise victory. I cannot promise survival. But I promise this: if we must fall, we will fall free. If we endure, it will be as ourselves, not as slaves, not as puppets, not as shadows in another's empire. We will endure as humanity. A roar swept across the galaxy. On Terra, vast crowds filled plazas, chanting his name. On frontier worlds, colonists raised makeshift weapons, pledging to fight. In the void, battered fleets reformed, their banners raised high. The Autobot legions marched, scarred but unbowed, their armor gleaming with renewed purpose. Even dissenters, even those who had cursed his mercy, now answered. For all their divisions, for all their doubts, they knew this was their last chance. Fleet by fleet, army by army, the Imperium gathered. Not as an empire of chains, but as a brotherhood of survival. Farmers laid down plows to take up rifles. Students became pilots. Elders became strategists. The scale of the mobilization dwarfed anything seen in human history, billions standing side by side, united not by fear of tyranny, but by hope carried in the voice of a single prime. In orbit, Optimus stood upon the bridge of his flagship, watching as star systems answered his call. Vessels of every size streamed into formation, their hulls bearing crude markings of unity, flames of freedom, emblems of hope. His optics softened as he spoke quietly, almost to himself. "This is not my army. It is theirs. It is humanity's, and it is beautiful." When at last the fleets converged, their combined strength lit the void with fire. It was not the machinery of war that defined them, but the unshakable will of those who refused to surrender. Optimus raised his blade, its scarred edge gleaming in the starlight. "The storm comes," he said, his voice carried across every channel, every world. "Let it come. For today humanity stands together, and together we will prove that even in the face of gods, freedom endures." The galaxy braced for war. The galaxy burned. The warp tore open like 1,000 wounds, vomiting forth fleets of jagged vessels and seas of demons that blotted out the stars. Reality itself buckled as screaming legions of chaos surged across the void. Firestorms licked across entire sectors, and the night sky glowed red with the blood of dying suns. The final war had begun. Humanity answered with everything it had. From every world, from every colony, the united fleets of the Imperium surged forward. Vessels both ancient and newly forged bristled with weapons, their hulls marked with the sigil of the Prime. Millions of guns roared, filling the void with fire. It was not order against chaos, but will against annihilation. The first clash was apocalyptic. Demon ships of living flesh collided with steel warships, their screaming hulls biting into metal like predators. Warp titans unfurled across the void, their silhouettes vast enough to eclipse moons. Human fleets broke, scattered, regrouped, and struck again, each sacrifice buying moments for the survivors to fight on. Optimus Prime led from the vanguard. His flagship, Light of Solace, cut through the warp storm like a blade of burning steel, its cannons pounding demon vessels into ash. At the heart of the storm, Optimus himself launched from the ship, his massive form descending onto battlefield after battlefield. Wherever he landed, the tide shifted. His axe split corrupted titans in half. His sword carved through demons whose names had cursed humanity for millennia. His voice roared across calms, a beacon of resolve amid despair. "Stand firm. Every spark matters. Humanity endures." On Terra's orbit, a swarm of demon engines descended, their wings blotting out the stars. The Autobot legions met them in boarding actions that turned steel corridors into charnel houses. Warriors fought to the last breath, locking blades with horrors that shredded their minds as easily as their flesh. Legionnaires detonated themselves to collapse bridges, dragging demons into the void with them. Each sacrifice was a declaration. Hope has a price, and we pay it willingly. On the ground, the war was no less horrific. Demons poured through rifts, their claws ripping open the earth. Cities burned, rivers boiled, and the skies rained fire. But humanity did not yield. Farmers turned freedom fighters. Children became messengers running through firestorms. Elders picked up weapons long since laid down. The Imperium fought as one, not because they were ordered, but because they chose to stand. Yet the tide was endless. For every demon slain, another crawled from the warp. For every ship destroyed, another clawed into existence. The Chaos Gods had emptied their coffers, and the galaxy itself seemed ready to break. Optimus fought across a dozen fronts, his body scarred, energon spilling freely. He battled warp-spawned monstrosities larger than mountains, his blade sparking with each blow. At one moment he collapsed to one knee, his armor dented and cracked, his optics flickering. Around him, soldiers faltered, fear gnawing at their courage. But then his voice rose again, steady despite the pain. "You are not alone. Look beside you. Look behind you. Humanity stands together. And together, no god will break us." The words lit a fire. Soldiers rose, screaming defiance. Fleets regrouped, hurling themselves into impossible charges. Civilians fought beside soldiers, voices crying out in unison. Across the galaxy, hope flared, fragile yet unyielding. Even as exhaustion threatened to consume him, Optimus pressed forward. He was no longer just a leader. He was the flame in the storm, the last light against the abyss. And though his body cracked, though his spark faltered, he refused to yield. The apocalypse war raged without end, but humanity stood. And at its heart, Optimus Prime still fought, a giant carved in light, holding back gods with nothing but resolve. The battle reached its breaking point. Across the void, fleets burned, and on countless worlds, the clash of mortals and demons shook the galaxy itself. But all eyes turned to a single battlefield, the rift at the heart of the storm, where the Chaos Gods unleashed their final weapon. From the warp emerged an avatar, a towering amalgamation of all four gods. Khorne's fury burned in its molten blades, Nurgle's rot dripped from its colossal frame, Tzeentch's shifting forms twisted its body with madness, and Slaanesh's whispers dripped poison into every soul that heard its voice. It was no mere champion, but a living embodiment of corruption, the god's answer to Optimus Prime's defiance. Optimus stood before it, his armor cracked, his spark faltering, yet his blade steady in his hands. Around him, the battlefield fell silent, soldiers pausing in awe and dread. The Prime faced not an enemy, but despair incarnate. The Avatar struck first. Its blow tore mountains apart, its scream cracked the air. Optimus staggered, his chest plate ripped open, energon spilling like blood. Yet he rose again, his voice steady. You will not break them. You will not chain them. As long as one spark endures, humanity will never bow. The clash shook reality. Blade met claw, light met shadow. Each strike was a storm. Rivers boiled, stars flickered, entire fleets trembled in orbit. The gods laughed through their avatar, mocking his ideals. Mercy has doomed you, Prime. Compassion is a lie. Survival demands chains. Optimus' optics flared, his strength waning but his conviction burning brighter than ever.
No!
Survival without freedom is not life. It is death wearing another face. The Avatar's claws pierced his chest, driving him to one knee. Pain racked his frame, his spark flickering like a dying flame. Yet he did not yield. With trembling hands, he reached deep into himself, into the fragment of the all-spark that had carried him across universes. He felt its power, the infinite wellspring of creation, the fire that had birthed Cybertron itself. It pulsed in rhythm with his spark, fading, but still alive, he whispered, almost to himself, one last gift. Rising with the last of his strength, Optimus charged. His blade, glowing with the energy of the all-spark, carved through the Avatar's chest. Light erupted, pure and blinding, clashing with the storm of chaos. The Avatar screamed, a sound that shattered rifts and silenced gods. Warp fire recoiled, collapsing inward. The invasion faltered as demons dissolved into ash, their forms banished back into the sea of madness. The galaxy fell silent. Humanity has endured. Optimus Prime stood amidst the ruin, his body broken, his blade shattered. His frame trembled, his optics dim. Around him, soldiers rushed forward, their voices crying his name, but he raised one hand to still them. His final words echoed, not through calms, but through the hearts of all who heard. Freedom will endure. As long as one spark burns, freedom will endure. And then the light within him dimmed. His body collapsed, a giant brought low. But his voice lived on, carried in memory, in song, in the fire of every soldier, every child, every colony that had believed in him. The Autobot legions knelt in silence, their banners lowered. Across the galaxy, bells tolled, fires burned, prayers rose. Humanity mourned not a god, not a tyrant, but a leader who had chosen compassion until his final breath. Yet his death was not an ending. The Autobot legion scattered, each bearing his creed to the stars. Colonies rebuilt, scarred but unbroken. The cult of the Prime transformed, no longer a fractured worship, but a remembrance, a faith not in divinity, but in ideals. Optimus had not forged an empire of chains, nor abandoned humanity to despair. He had left them something greater, a legacy of hope, a reminder that freedom was worth every sacrifice. And so, though the Prime had fallen, his spark lived on in the hearts of humanity. Against gods, against darkness, against the void itself, one truth remained eternal: freedom will endure.